Which running backs have to be in your lineup for week 9 and who should be on your bench? Stay tuned to find out. We'll tell you our must starts and must sits at the position. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button before you head your way out. Injuries just keep piling up at running back. But Chris, surely there's somebody we can count on at this point.
Yeah, the injuries keep piling up, but sometimes that presents opportunities. And especially for this guy, my first must start of the week, and that's Chase Edmonds, who's going to benefit greatly from an injury to Kenyon Drake. So we've seen Edmonds all year has really been better than Kenyon Drake. I don't care how much of a Kenyon Drake fan you are, you have to be honest and admit that Chase Edmonds in his limited touches has actually looked better than Kenyon Drake. So now we're going to get to see him in the full workload, right? The only guy behind him is Benjamin, who's probably going to have a very minimal role. I expect Chase Edmonds to get a ton of touches this week. And the opponent is not necessarily, the greatest matchup for running backs, but still a top 10 matchup with the Miami Dolphins. They allow over 100 yards a game and almost 5 yards per carry. And we've seen Edmonds be very, very effective in the passing game as well. So I have Chase Edmonds as a top 10 running back in week 9.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, as an obvious Dolphins fan, that defense is definitely not as bad as everyone thought it would be going into the season, but they're not quite as good and dominant as they looked last week against the Rams. All right, so I don't think it should scare you away just because they had a big game. But yeah, Edmonds, he's going to get, I think, almost all the touches in that backfield, so you've got to start him for sure this week. No revenge game for Kenyon Drake, sadly. I'm going to go with a guy that I think has to be in your lineup each week, pretty much going forward, and that's Damien Harris. And it just so happens plays the Jets this week. Couldn't get too much better as far as matchup goes for running back or any position for that matter. But Damien Harris, it's really unbelievable when you look at how effective he's been, averaging 5.7 yards per carry on the season. And he really hasn't gotten that much of a chance to show what he's got in the 2 games that he's gotten more than 10 carries, which has only been 2 games. He's had 100 yards each time. Last week, of course, hit 102 on just 16 carries. The offense as a whole is, a little suspect, but that's more about the passing game, right? All the receivers are hurt. Cam Newton's been inconsistent. They're going to rely on Harris to kind of literally carry the ball for them going forward, to carry that offense. Now that they found their guy, I think they're going to give him even bigger workload going forward. And of course, in this game, they'll be able to afford to run the ball quite a bit. So to me, Harris is almost going to be an every week RB2.
Yeah, I agree. I really like Damien Harris this week against the Jets. You got to think game script will be on his side. He's going to get all those touches, and he should certainly go over 100 yards again and a touchdown well within the realm of possibility. My second must-start running back, James Robinson of Jacksonville, going against the Texans. Now, it could be easy to look at this and look a few weeks ago when these two teams played each other, see he only had 10 points. He had a fumble. To me, you throw that game out. That was a fluke game. The Texans just rolled the Jaguars from the get-go. I expect Robinson to have a monster week. He's been really good the last couple of weeks. He's getting all the snaps, all the work there in Jacksonville. No other running back is really getting much run at all. And against the Texans, the second worst defense against running backs, giving up over 150 yards and more than 5.5 yards per carry to running backs. I expect James Robinson, kind of like Chase Edmonds, I expect James Robinson to also have a top 10 week in week 9.
Definitely possible. And, with Gardner Minshew out and who knows, I guess Jake Luton at quarterback, whoever they're going to put out there, maybe Mike Glennon, it doesn't matter. They're going to try to hand the ball off as much as possible. So yeah, you have to think Robinson just by sheer volume alone. I mean, he's definitely bound for a top 15, if not top 10 finish. And on the other side of the ball, I'm going with David Johnson. He's always been kind of a fringe RB2. He hasn't had any monster games. He hasn't really had any terrible games. He's just been kind of there. All right, not the exciting pick that you want in fantasy, not a week winner. This might be the week, right? He hasn't had a 100-yard game yet, but the closest he got was a couple of weeks ago against Jacksonville, 96 rushing yards. I think, a team that's on the ropes, headed for possibly the number 1 or at least number 2 pick in the draft. I think David Johnson has a chance to have his best game yet. So you got to plug him in this week.
Yeah, David Johnson, the one thing he has been doing this year is giving your teams a nice floor every single week. Just hasn't had those big ceiling games, but you're right. In this matchup, this could be the week where he hits that big ceiling game. If nothing else, the floor is extremely safe this week, so you've got to have him in your lineup. And then my final must start is my boy. I don't know why I called him my boy, James Conner in Pittsburgh. Don't overreact to what we saw in week 8 with Boston Scott. The Eagles' offense is horrendous. Carson Wentz turning the ball over multiple times just took Boston Scott completely out of that game. That will not be the case this week with James Conner and the Steelers. The Steelers are undefeated. They're going to be rolling the Cowboys. I mean, I can't even imagine this game being close. It's football. Anything can happen. But on paper, this looks like a Pittsburgh blowout. James Conner, the unquestioned bell cow there in Pittsburgh, should be getting 20-plus touches in this game against one of the worst defenses in the NFL. Again, another guy, like all my picks, that I think has top 10 upside in week 9. Lock him in wherever you got him.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, here's your boy. You've stood by him. After last year, he's not my boy, right? I had way too many shares of James Conner in 2019, which is why I have 0 shares this year in 2020. But I kind of wish I did now. But yeah, this is a game where the running game is definitely going to dominate. So you got Conner, lock him in for sure. And then kind of my boy here, I got a lot of David Montgomery on some teams just because he's kind of a discount RB2 on draft day. He still kind of is what you kind of thought he would be. Solid, not too exciting. Again, not a super high ceiling, hasn't had a 100-yard game yet either, not scoring a lot of touchdowns, but he's getting the job done. And just by volume, the fact that he's actually healthy and he's the only running back really getting touches in Chicago, he's still there, right? So that's not a great endorsement, but I'll tell you, last week was his best game. He just looked really good, had some explosive runs against New Orleans, which is a really good run defense. So going against Tennessee, chance for more points on the board this game. I like him as a very good bet to get in the end zone, which I know it's hard to predict touchdowns, but I think they're going to keep riding Montgomery, take some pressure off the passing game. This offense is slowly getting a little bit better. So Montgomery is a guy you just can't bench in a good matchup like this.
Yeah, I agree. Montgomery, he's getting the work, not always the efficiency, but in a plus matchup like this, you have to start him. There's just not enough running backs getting the amount of volume that he's getting. Plus the matchup, like you said, he offers, kind of like David Johnson, he offers you a very safe floor this week with the potential for a big ceiling.
Now, there's some guys that you would think just by, way of getting volume, you would keep locked in. We're going to tell you some guys that you probably should sit based on matchup. And I'll tell you right now, some of these names might surprise you. Chris, your first one, I know a lot of people aren't going to like this pick, but go ahead. Who's your first must sit?
It's Jonathan Taylor, the rookie in Indy. After Marlon Mack went down, everybody just kind of penciled him in as a weekly top 10 running back, and that just hasn't been the case. And he hasn't been getting that, bell cow, workhorse, however you want to call it, type volume that we expected he would get. And then it really went down last week when Jordan Wilkins, out carried him, right? And Nyheim Hines outproduced them. So now he's rolling into week 9. You're not sure how many touches he's going to get. Is he going to split with Wilkins? Is Wilkins going to get the bulk again? And we know Nyheim Hines is going to be involved in the passing game. And they're playing the Ravens, which just happened to be the toughest run defense as far as fantasy points allowed. But they only allow 76 yards on the ground, just over 4 yards per carry. You just can't trust Jonathan Taylor after what we saw last week and now heading into a brutal matchup in week 9. I think you have to bench Jonathan Taylor and hope that last week was an aberration and this week he gets, closer to 15 touches. He might not do much with them, but at least if you see that, you can be encouraged going forward. But in week 9, on your bench.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there was no topic in fantasy football, even just football in general, that was hotter and, more divisive this week than Jonathan Taylor. All I know is that right now that's a committee. It's going to be a 3-man running back committee. And that means you don't trust any of them, honestly, unless you have to flex somebody out. Speaking of truthers and the opposite side here, a lot of people were saying finally Ronald Jones is the guy. He had 3 straight games of 100 yards. He was scoring. He was the man. And you know what? Bruce Arians just does not care. If you had any doubt whether Bruce Arians wants Ronald Jones to be the starting running back, I think we have our proof now. Leonard Fournette is healthy and playing, and so Ronald Jones is just disappearing. Okay, 13 carries for 34 yards in week 7, 7 carries for 23 yards, and Leonard Fournette doubled his carries. Okay, so it's pretty obvious why they signed Leonard Fournette. They want him to be the guy. Jones, doesn't matter how well he's done. He's just, for whatever reason, he's just not going to be the lead back as long as Fournette is healthy. So you can bench him, especially against New Orleans, which I know I just said David Montgomery did pretty well against them, but that's still not an easy run defense to go against. So you got to keep Jones on the shelf.
Yeah, I agree. This is 2 weeks in a row where we've seen Fournette get the bulk of the work. So I agree. Cannot trust Ronald Jones, especially in this matchup. And then my final must sit is Todd Gurley going against the Broncos. I know it's tough to sit Gurley, but if you look at last week against the Panthers, he had 18 carries. Brian Hill had 11. And this was a game where the Falcons were pretty much in control and could run the ball more than they typically do. But Todd Gurley wasn't involved at all in the passing game last week. Brian Hill got 2 catches. Todd Gurley didn't have any. There were significant stretches of the game where Gurley was just on the sideline, not even in the game. And I don't know if they're trying to rest his knee or if he's not 100% or what. But this week, they're facing the Broncos, 6th fewest points given up to running backs, less than 100 yards per game, less than a touchdown every 4 games. So it's really, really hard to trust Todd Gurley in this matchup, with his inconsistent usage. I'd be looking to bench Todd Gurley if I had him.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about sneaky starters or streamers, right? Somebody who could, blow up and you put him on your squad. He's kind of a sneaky sit, which you wouldn't think bench Todd Gurley, especially because, there's this running back is so thin. But you're right, Denver has been up and down with run defense, but they've had some games where they've shut down teams. And then Devin Singletary, I'm not saying Zach Moss is going to just take his job, even though he was the one who is the better fantasy producer. He's the one who's getting more receptions. He's the one getting the red zone work and the touchdowns. But besides all that, Devin Singletary, you can't trust him unless it happens to be a plus matchup. And even when Zach Moss was out injured, it's not like Singletary was doing much for your fantasy team. Seattle, I know it's not a really tough defense, but it actually is a lot tougher against the run than the pass. They are a funnel defense if there ever was one. They give up all sorts of points to wide receivers and quarterbacks and because they try to focus on the run. All right, so you didn't really have a lot of great reasons to start Singletary in the first place, but you definitely don't want to start him in this matchup where it's going to be most likely a shootout between those 2 quarterbacks.
Yeah, I agree. This feels like a Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, John Brown week.
Yeah, exactly. We have to shift our thinking. It's not Buffalo what we thought it was going to be, defense first and run the ball, control the ball. It's a different kind of Buffalo team than what we thought going into the season. All right, that does it for running back start sit. You guys have any specific questions about players we didn't mention? Hit us up here. Leave a comment right here on this channel, of course. Hit subscribe. You get a chance. We put out start sit advice for every position. And of course, don't miss Endgame Live 2 hours before kickoff every Sunday. We answer all sorts of questions about your lineups to help you win, because that's what we're here for. All right, good luck in week 9, and thanks for watching.